We are live, sir.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. On behalf of Center for Justice, Law and Society, we'd like to welcome you to our Law, Sexuality and Society conversation and lecture series, which we started in 2012 and we've been doing it for the last 9 years. We're delighted to have the theme of power and resistance, reimagining gender, sexual politics and the law. This is the third lecture in the series, and we have today with us Jaya Sharma, delivering a lecture on an offering from BDSM to feminism. Jaya is a feminist, queer, kinky activist and writer based in New Delhi. As a part of a feminist NGO, she worked on issues of gender and education for over 20 years. As a queer activist, she has co-founded and has been involved with queer forums in Delhi. She is also one of the co-founders of the Kinky Collective, a group that aims to raise awareness about BDSM and to strengthen the community from within. Currently, her writings seek to explore sexuality and politics through the lens of the site, which I can't wait to get into. Thank you so much, Jaya, for being here. We are so excited about it.
Thank you so much. I wanted to share that the location from which I'm speaking is from within the women's movement. And I've been a part of the women's movement for some 30 years now. And I think that the feminist mantra of personal is political has sort of been in my blood and really important to me, like it is for, I think, most of us who are feminists. But personal is political, I think, has largely meant that that the way in which we understand our individual experiences is helped by a larger political understanding, and that we try to lead our lives in a way that is in sync with our politics, right? So personal is political has had that kind of a flow, as though from the political to the personal. The political helping us in our personal struggles and also sort of guiding us. There's perhaps a need to turn the gaze the other way, from the personal to the political as well, sort of complete the circle as it were. And that's what I'm hoping to do today, to really talk from the location of the personal and to see what and whether that might help us understand the political realm much more. I also want to say that I'm speaking here as an individual and not as a member of the Kinky collective. Although a lot of what I'm going to say draws upon conversations and activism that we've done together, but there will be things that I'll say that have nothing to do with the Kinky collective. And I also will be drawing upon my understanding of psychoanalysis. I'm not a formal kind of student of psychoanalysis, certainly not teaching it anywhere, but I'm passionate about it. For me, my journey with psychoanalysis began with me as the client. So I was in psychoanalytic therapy for 5 years, and but then I found its value so much more than just for me personally, that it's now become a lens that I kind of carry with me. So can we move to the next slide here? So when I was, you don't have to actually look at the screen. I'll talk. That's easier. So when I was thinking about the presentation, the words that first came to me were fear and thrill. And if I can just share, quite randomly, I want to share that during my psychoanalysis, I think I must have spent the first 6 to 8 months like talking my head out, like what is my analysis of like what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and realized quite soon that that was a precious waste of time and money because psychoanalysis unfortunately is expensive. And then I began to just lie there on the couch, literally, for long enough till some words kind of bubbled up. And I find that quite nice actually, even when I'm working. So anyway, so the words that bubbled up as it were fear and thrill. And I think the reason why these words came up was when I joined the BDSM community, which was now 12 years ago. So I can't see the name of that online platform. Although if you Google it, it's the first thing that you'll come across. But because we are still an underground community, we kind of have a sort of a policy decision, if you like, not to kind of name it publicly. So, anyways, let's call it like the Kinky universe. It's like a Kinky Facebook, and a lot of people join the community through the Kinky universe. So when I joined the Kinky universe, I was super excited, and I was like this newbie, like full of questions, and so I put out this question to those who were more experienced. Well, everybody was more experienced than me. I had just joined. I of course happened to be the oldest, but I was still the most sort of innocent and eager and ignorant. So I basically asked people like how do they deal with their fears, because I was excited and I was scared, I had no clue actually. So I asked people on this online forum like how do you deal with your fears? So this one person turned around and he said fear, you mean thrill? And I mean that for me was the beginning of my kind of journey with Kink, because he was raising a really important question. We think that it's either fear or thrill, as if it's a binary, and a conflictual binary. It's this versus that. But I think that his response really helped me see that maybe it's not this versus that. It's this and that. And maybe not even this and that. Maybe they are so kind of fused together that it's difficult to even separate the two. So this fear and thrill will keep coming up through the course of the presentation. If we can move on to the next. So I just do at the risk of being a bit boring, I just do a basic kind of thing on BDSM. Just I'm sorry if it's familiar for a lot of people, but I didn't want to assume. So basically, I just quickly run through it. So the larger umbrella of kink includes BDSM and fetishes. I won't be talking about fetishes. I'll focus on BDSM because I think that at least so far I can see the links with feminism there much more. So BDSM normally is referred to as bondage, domination, sadomasochism, but the D and the S actually stand for two words. So it's bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, sadism and masochism. And I would say the main kind of defining thing about BDSM is that we are talking about playing either with power or with pain. And it's really important to clarify that not everybody gets off on pain, even though that's the typical kind of sort of stereotype about BDSM. But it's important to remember that not everybody is kind of turned on by pain. Even more important than that is that that kink is a spectrum. Okay, it's not just those people who are part of the BDSM community. You know, it's very easy. I've found over the years, it's very easy to do a us and them. Okay, it's like I'll give you a parallel of like we are straight and they are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, whatever, you know. So from that safe kind of place that we are straight, but we are progressive, or we are liberal, and we are your allies, but we are straight. You know, so similarly, even with kink, there is very much that danger that we will be your allies, you out there in the BDSM community. But if we were to consider the fact that all eroticism is infused with power in some way or the other, then surely all of us are thinking. If we think about something like the love bite, something as simple as a love bite, surely we know that pain and pleasure cannot be easily separated. Yeah. So I would really invite us. I will share the specificities of the BDSM community and some of the consent-related practices. So I'm not saying that it doesn't matter, but I'm saying that when we're engaging, let's engage with a larger kind of framework of power and or pain. Yeah. The other thing is that I talk about transcendence much more, but my own experience of talking about BDSM over the years is that that I think sometimes we just tend to forget to share how amazing it is. I mean, we just get into clarifications, we get into conversations about consent, and we will today as well. But I just wanted to put it down there so that I don't forget to just say that while it is a spectrum, that I think that because one feels safe in a community that has consent at its core, a community that will boycott those who violate consent, a supremely non-judgmental community. The fact that we have the safe word or other mechanisms of doing consent, and I say doing consent because we know it's a process and it's not like a one-time thing. So I think feeling safe enough to then undertake those adventures and really, I think, pushing one's own limits and also pushing others' limits. I think that's where the transcendence really happens, sort of moving kind of almost like beyond your idea of yourself and beyond your own limits. And I'm tempted to say, maybe it's too early to say, but I will say it anyway, okay, I'm saying this also because I'm slightly fearful, and I was trying to share this with Deepika also, that that kink is sort of becoming like a new cool. Okay, I mean, while that might be like a fantastic thing, and it is a fantastic thing, and many more people are talking about it. Many people are joining the community. Lots of young women are joining the community, and that's fantastic. But some of us who are kind of older in the scene also feel that there's a way in which it seems like it's becoming very act oriented. It's becoming a bit like a checklist of like, this is what turns me on. Okay, no, I like, I want to flog her, I don't want to waste when I, no, the gain is really what's doing it for me, or whatever, or this is my thing. And I want to posit, nothing wrong with that, but I want to posit that against something that a close friend of mine in the community says. So he's a dominant. And he says that his style and his approach is actually to make the submissive do what they don't like to do. Okay, and for me that was like, wow, because that somehow for me summed up that it kind of clarified in a sense that actually what matters is the power dynamic and not the acts. And what matters maybe is that ability to surrender or the ability to dominate, and not so much like the specific acts, which you see a lot. I don't know if I should be saying this, but apologies in advance to my male submissive friends who might be seeing this. But I think it's also slightly gendered. I mean, I feel like male submissives tend to have a bit of a like, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want. So not quite the spirit of surrender always. So anyway, just moving on to consent, of course, is at the heart of BDSM. If it's not consensual, then it's abuse. I'll also just mention some words that I'll be using later. Playing, which refers to actually that power play happening, or playing with pain or whatever. And I actually love the word playing because it's got that dimension of exploration and adventure and the unknown and also joy. And because normally BDSM is also associated with like dark and black. Of course, it is that too. And by saying playing, I don't mean it's not intense. It's hugely intense. But I like the word play because, yeah, exploration, adventure. Then the term session will refer to that period of time in which two or more people are entering into the play. It could be a few hours, it could be, if you're lucky, it could be like many days, whatever. And then, of course, you have consent-related practices. I won't go into the details of that, but of course, safe word is really, really important. It's the word that two or more people agree on beforehand. The only thing that matters is it should be simple so that you don't forget what the safe word was. And the moment that you use the safe word, whatever is happening comes to an end unconditionally and immediately. Yeah. I'll also keep stopping and asking for comments and questions. So anything so far that's not clear? Or should we move on? Yeah. So the next slide. Okay. So you know what I thought I'll do is that so don't bother looking at that actually, because that's more for me than so what I thought I would do is to talk first about why BDSM seems to be in conflict with feminism. Yeah, I'll talk about that BDSM versus feminism kind of thing, and why that might be. And then I'll move on to what I think BDSM has to offer to feminism. Yeah, I'll go in that kind of order. So, and this is my kind of set of like reflections on why people might think that there's a conflict. And I think one of the main reasons is that when you say the word BDSM, mostly what comes up, जैसे कहते हैं हिंदी में लोगों के जहन में क्या उठता है, it's basically the male as the dominant and the woman as the submissive. That's like almost like a cliche kind of image that comes up. And of course, it's really, really important to remember that there are all kinds of permutations and combinations. What if there are two trans people playing? What if the male is a submissive playing with any gender as dominant? Or what if the dominant is a woman? And amongst the many permutations and combinations, why I'm also picking on the male submissive and the woman dominant is because there most clearly one can see that gendered sexual norms are being challenged, right? We know that in a patriarchal context, men are meant to be in control, men are meant to take the initiative, they are meant to be the so-called active partner during sex. And so imagine the kind of space that kink enables a man, a cis man, to be able to surrender, to give up control, to not have to play that typical masculine role in an erotic encounter. Then also let's think about female dominance. Again, in patriarchy, the woman is, we know, meant to put the desire of the other before hers, including and definitely in sex. So imagine that woman dominant who only thinks about her own desire. Because actually BDSM, won't work if she's not thinking about her own desire. That power play only happens because she is completely focused on her desire and only her desire. So there are these kinds of challenges that BDSM poses to patriarchy, and it not only does BDSM pose a challenge to gendered sexual norms, it poses a challenge to sexual norms per se. Okay, in the sense that a sexual norm, for instance, would be like pursuit of pleasure, right? Pleasure meaning that which is pleasant and that which is pleasing. Okay, that's like a sexual norm. So it's almost like an assumption that that's what you would want in a sexual encounter. And so BDSM is also kind of turning that sexual norm on its head. That maybe I'm not looking for something pleasant and pleasing. Maybe what I need and what I desire is either pain or humiliation, or I want to be controlled, or I want to control the other. So sexual, not just gendered sexual norms themselves are being kind of turned upside down. And I want to just quote Foucault, who himself, as we probably know, was a BDSM practitioner. And he talked about the non-violent, non-genitalized nature of kink. And I'm quoting him in an interview. He said that BDSM allows the inventing of new possibilities of pleasure and of eroticizing the body as a whole. Yeah, and I think this also speaks to the fact that that in BDSM, actually, what we normally think of as sex, as penetrative sex, either need not happen at all, or even if it happens, it might be the least interesting thing that happens. Okay, firstly experience. So you know, so even in terms of like clothes on, clothes off, clothes, it really does, that's not the point. And in fact, many dominants will actually insist or prefer to keep their clothes on because it gives them like a more of a sense of power or control. So because it is so much to do with power play, so much to do with I don't even know whether to call it mind or what to call it, but certainly not just the body. So in that sense, it challenges a lot of what we normally think of as regular kind of sex. Anything so far? You'll have to jump in quite quickly if you have comments and questions, because otherwise I'll keep moving. Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah, that's great. So I want to begin responding. It's such an important question that so there's a friend of mine. He's also a dominant, and he happens to be white. And he talks about, he gives this example of race play. Okay, that's not from an Indian context, but I think it's really a telling example. So race play basically being where you play with racial stereotypes, right? And you use that almost like a gali or for humiliation, or it's part of the power play, where you are actually putting in play, in a playful, not playful like a non-serious way, but in play, you are using racial stereotypes in the power exchange. So he said this thing that he said that if you are a racist, you cannot do race play, because then it's not play. Yeah. So I think that if somebody is like a patriarch, I mean, we're all patriarchal in some way, but some who's like really patriarchal, then I think that person is incapable of actually playing with gender norms, because then it doesn't have that element of play. Yeah. The other thing I would say is that I was going to say this later, but I'll say it now, that it's really, really important to recognize the role of the unconscious and the psyche. Because when we're thinking about our desires and we're thinking about our fantasies, we cannot read them in a literal one-to-one way. It's a bit like dreams. I was in fact in Jindal only yesterday, and I was talking in another class that if I have a dream, and if I murder my mother in that dream, what does that mean? Does it mean I actually want to murder my mother? It probably says something definitely about my relationship with my mother. It could mean that I felt guilty, maybe I didn't look after her well enough when she was sick, or whatever. But it's very unlikely for it to literally mean that I want to murder my mother, right? So I think that we have to remember that the unconscious is also at play, and the unconscious and the psyche as a kind of a storehouse of memories and experiences from the time we were infants, from our childhood, but not just limited to that. Something that continues through our adult life. So the unconscious is something alive, organic, and which is continuously informing our desires and our fantasies. So I think just to be, I'll talk more about it later, but for now, just to say that, to not fall into that trap of thinking that that because I have a fantasy of forced sex on the terrace doesn't mean that in the rest of my life that I will allow somebody to even hold my hand if I don't want them to. Okay, so moving on to this question related to whether there's a conflict between BDSM and feminism, is this question of can we move on to the next? Sorry, I forgot to say. Is whether there is a conflict between being submissive and being a feminist? Because I think this kind of captures that tension that we feel might be there. So, just wanted to share some reflections on. I'm a submissive, so I also speak from my own experience and location, and just something that I wanted to share about submission and power. So while on the face of it, it might seem that the submissive is the vichari, helpless, like powerless one, that actually a dominant exists only because the submissive exists. Like there is no dominant without a submissive. And the fact that you have consent mechanisms and something like the state word is a tremendous source of power. Like I was saying earlier, if I use the state word, whatever's happening has to come to an end without any negotiation, without any ifs and buts. And also transcendence is a state that in itself is sort of imbued with a kind of power. I don't know if that sounds abstract, but when you are in that space, in that zone, if you like, it is like a feeling of being supremely powerful. I'll explain that more. Maybe that's not very clear. But what I did want to share here to illustrate what I mean about the power line with the submissive is an experience like during a session. So this dominant had asked me to perform some tasks before the session, and see, even submissives, like it's a subculture, right? So there's lots of jargon, and there's lots of our own stereotypes, etc. So there are submissives who are brats, who are kind of naughty and playful and will kind of resist and give the dominant a hard time, etc. So I'm not like that. I'm very, very boring. I'm like a good submissive. I do my best, more than my best. So I had tried to do my best, but I could not do the task that the submissive had given to me, and as a result of that, and that task had to do with his pleasure. Okay, and because I had not been able to do that task, and because it impacted his pleasure, while he was using the flogger on me, I can call it impact, but in shorthand, I can also say he was beating me. Okay, and I'm a bit of a masochist, so that's not a bad thing, don't worry. So there was, and I was on all fours, and just soon after he started, I just froze. Because in my body, I knew that the way in which he was hitting me had nothing to do with power. This was not power play. This was not dominating that was happening. He was a man who was out of control, who was enraged that he was not getting the pleasure that he had wanted. And in my head, I was like, you bastard. Like, this is not any kind of power play happening over there. And I had always heard this thing that, power lies with the submissive. Like, that's part of the kind of, thing that buzzes around in the community. But I think for the first time in my body is when I really experienced it. Like, I knew the truth of that, because I could not, I could not continue to surrender to him, and so he could not dominate. So I just want to move on to talking a little bit about transcendence. And since I might not, and I wasn't doing a very good job of describing what that state is like, now also I can take a cheap shot at it, and I can say that the closest example is maybe like an orgasm or a post-orgasm moment where everything seems to stand still, and where nothing like the paper that you're meant to submit or the bill you haven't paid, etc., like doesn't, it's not buzzing around in your zehen. And so, but imagine that kind of a state, and not just for a minute or two, but like for a much longer period of time. and if you're lucky, maybe some hours when you're in the zone, as it were. So, I mean, that's the kind of intensity that of transcendence that we are talking about. So, I want to take the help of somebody called Emmanuel Gent, who's a psychoanalyst, and he's also, I discovered, he's an electronic music composer. I've yet to hear his music, but I was quite happy to see that detail. So I'll just share what I'll read out what he says about his focus is on surrender and on transcendence. But I feel that what he's describing is not just what a submissive feels. I have friends who are dominant who also describe similar states of being. So he writes that it's a feeling of being in the present, in quote, where past and future have receded from consciousness. And he says it's a journey towards the discovery of one sense of wholeness, even one sense of unity with other living beings. Yeah, that kind of what George Bataille also says, that we are discontinuous beings, and actually our impulse and our need is to break that discontinuity that exists between us. And so I mean, he's talking in the context of sex and violence and death, George Bataille, but somehow I relate to that as well, that we are separate, boundaried beings, and perhaps we don't want to be. Somewhere there is a need for that sense of continuity and connectedness with the other, which the pushing of limits maybe enables. So Gent also talks about the desire to let down defensive barriers, to manifest in infantilism and helpless demandingness, and to heal something deep inside. He also writes that there's a fear of re-experiencing and the wish to re-experience. So note that now, both things. The fear of re-experiencing and the wish to re-experience the breakdown that has already occurred so early in life that it cannot be remembered. I'll come back to this. And lastly, he also writes that this surrender may be accompanied by a feeling of dread and death, and or clarity, relief, and even ecstasy. So I guess ecstasy comes closest to this thing, right? Ecstasis, like being outside almost of your body in that transcendental state. Can we move to the next slide? So I want to just pick up from what Emmanuel Gent said, and what also relates to your question about how much does it have to do with the materiality and the social norms, etc., and to look at how much does it have to do with the unconscious. So I wanted to just also, since this is about feminism, to question actually this category of false consciousness, because I really, beyond the point, don't understand the discourse of false consciousness, and especially not in the realm of the erotic, because there is a kind of an imagination that this is what ideal or good sex or erotics is meant to be like, and then we internalize some bad kind of versions of that, and we act according to it. So I really don't think desire works like that. And I think that the paradigm of false consciousness is faulty because it fails to take into account the unconscious and the psyche. Although there isn't any time at all, I do want to say that that, like what Gent was saying, that it is as though a rupture has happened when we were infants or children. And I think that is something that really resonates somewhere with me, and I think it's a precious thing that psychoanalysis offers, and what Jacques Lacan talks about in terms of the lost object. So it's almost like that there was this imagined kind of sense of oneness with the mother in patriarchy, could be any primary caretaker, the beginning of limits that are put on us, the prohibitions that start. You can no longer touch your body the way that you could as a baby. You can no longer play with ships and pee. The mother's breasts are not yours, whenever you want that. You have to begin the process of growing up that the mother is not just mine. The mother has her own desires. The father, in a typical heteronormative kind of a setup, father is there. There is that kind of competition. That it's almost like beginning to deal with the harsh realities of life. And with the onset of these no's, no, 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 that what psychoanalysis says is that the kind of lack within us, the lack, is something that drives desire. It is because we feel we have lost something that we are always in search of that. And that is a shifting thing. That desire shifts from one object to another, and we feel, oh, we found it, And that lost object might be in the most unlikely places, No wonder we find ourselves falling in love with that person who everybody tells us is all wrong for us. We all know that, right? We've told ourselves that, friends have wasted their time telling us that, but it's not surprising. It's like during my research, in a survey that I was doing, the words that kept coming up were almost like, how can it be? Like hashtag, how can it be? How can it be that I'm in love with somebody like this? Or how can it be that somebody like me has desires like this? But that's how it is, because the unconscious is at play. And the other concept from psychoanalysis that I want to share very quickly is that prohibition eroticizes. So there's a psychoanalyst whose name is Bruce Fink, who is extremely accessible, unlike most psychoanalytic writers. And he says it so beautifully, just 2 words. He says prohibition eroticizes. So it is precisely that which is taboo, precisely that which is prohibited, that turns us on. So maybe we shouldn't be so surprised that not just what mainstream society considers to be taboo, what feminism considers to be taboo is also very likely to turn us on. Because I care 2 hoots about mainstream society, but I do care a lot about feminism. So there is bound to be a kind of an erotic charge where in my fantasies, I feel like I'm breaking a feminist sexual norm. Only 15 minutes left. No, I'm way behind. Yeah. Okay. So before I move on to, so till now I've tried to share why I think people feel that there's a conflict between BDSM and feminism, and I can also try to offer some reasons as to why I think there is no conflict, or why it only appears to be a conflict. And I'm now going to move on to what I think BDSM has to offer to feminism. But before I do that, is there anything that anybody wants to? Yeah, please. Yeah.
We're talking about that, they're not being any binary in terms of power and consent. I'm very curious to understand where people refer to them as switches, both like create dominant and submissive depending on the situation. How does that respond to all the challenges? You can experience pleasure both in an extractive setting, but also in a
yeah. So I think that so switches being people who enjoy or need to play both the dominant role and the submissive role, and so I think that so whatever role you're playing, strangely actually you're playing with the binary. I mean, but it's playing. You're not literally occupying that binary position. So I think, I'm glad you raised it, because I think with the switches, it's also like it's also raising a question that it's not something very, how do you say? It's not like I'm that kind of personality that will only, enjoy dominance. Maybe I am. So it kind of indicates like indicates possibilities, like people who enjoy both. at least most switches that I know will either inhabit the role of the dominant or the submissive. Okay, I can't speak for everybody, but I think at least in that moment, of course, it can flip. Sometimes people say the intensity is so much, it almost seems to flip on its own, and you don't know, like, oh my God, what just happened, you know? But at least I think for that moment, for that erotic energy to flow, for the power exchange to happen, I think in a moment people have to inhabit the two poles of the binary. Yeah.
I have a question around you spoke of desire. I think the background to my question is that desire. So how do we think about that background in BDSM? So in conversation with them, so what if we were to situation where somebody was sexually abused and now as a part of their sexual practice they enjoy feeling like they're being so how do we conduct those?
Yeah. So that's actually, so I've heard from friends in the BDSM community. I've also read some experiences where people have spoken about how healing that can be. I mean, I don't have direct experience of that, but many people have talked about and written about this, that that while what they experience, not necessarily just in their childhood, but even in their adult lives, as a consent violation, that in the context of BDSM, of play with a person who they have complete trust with, to recreate that kind of a scenario is deeply healing, because now they are in control. Like even if they are the submissive, they have, together with the dominant, created that scenario. And it's in complete contrast with the violation in which they had no control. So there are many beautiful actually stories of healing through this. Yeah. Yeah.
Might be a little bit but we were talking about how BDSM also plays into the ideas of taboo things that feminists consider taboo, then that kind of eroticized into BDSM. And so my question is in terms of porn and how they represent BDSM, and there are like they talk about rape fantasy and they talk about that kind of power and they show it in porn, and a lot of people who watch it kind of get influenced by it in terms of them then thinking that consent really doesn't matter in certain cases. The woman may actually enjoy me forcing myself upon her, but they kind of get those ideas forms doing something. And because it has such an impact on how you sex in general, because you don't really have a very good system of sex education. Porn is an outlet for a lot of people to then understand what sex is like. So do you think that then that would have an effective impact on something that feminists talk about when we say that BDSM really kind of influence violence?
Yeah. So I think that I think there's a, in terms of research, as there's a lot of mixed kind of data I think out there in terms of impact of porn on behavior, but I think that maybe more and more there is some recognition that that it's bound to have some kind of impact on behavior, especially in terms of expectations. Okay, but from that to think that watching porn, even porn in which there is what seems to be violence, that whether watching that will make somebody go out there and do a violent sexual act, I feel is a far stretch. I mean, I think it takes much more to generate violence than watching something on screen and repeating. So I think that it's an important concern, but I don't think the impact works in that kind of a way. I also just want to say that there's also kink.com, which actually has BDSM material, and it's an ethical website. and they actually ensure that the people who are acting are consenting. They even have conversations with the with the people who've acted afterwards about how they're playing and all that. So there are fortunately also options like that available. Were you saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just in the context of what she said.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what she meant. But you know, I think it's the fear was more to do with the fact that when your sex education is met, you don't really have this conversation with people about what is, I mean, consent was not a conversation about at all. You know, I mean, it's being spoken about, maybe in academic circles it was spoken about, but a decade ago, nobody was talking about consent the way we are talking now. So in that sort of situation, where you are watching pornography, which is showing violent acts, the fear really is, as I understand, that you take that to be the way a sexual encounter is supposed to take place. You know, be mindful of the fact that not all pornography is really teaching you. Very, very simple. We are doing that. So in which case, when you go out there, you want to have sex with somebody, you will tend to replicate what you have seen on screen, because that's been your only source of kind of self-discovery about your body, how you want to kind of fantasize and do what you're doing. The person you're doing it with has probably not watched this and is not on the same level as you. And then that might kind of translate in kind of body.
Yeah.
And therefore, you can say that this is a positive.
I'd like to add, if you sort of dismiss the pornography as violence, it's probably not viewed as violence. The main audience is not going to think it's violent. They will actually feel that it's part of it. They will not look at it. So, like, saying that watching violence will not, it's far-fetched to say that you actually do violence, because you also don't. I think it's different because you're not interpreting.
But I still feel that I just feel that behaving in a way that is whether they think of it as violence or what we consider to be violence. Like I think it takes a lot more to commit a violent act than simply watching, no matter how much you watched on screen. But porn is it's like we need another several hours to kind of talk about it. But I did want to, what do you want to say about consent or yeah?
No, I just wanted to add on to
Yeah.
the point saying, I do feel like it does make people violent or make them have violence. But there's not much we can do about it because the body is not really regulated. So all we can do about it here is just spread information, educate ourselves, make sure people around us are educated. Just start an open conversation about it.
Yeah, and I think it's a
Pornography, I think we're going to run a lecture on this, but I think it's really important to understand that the consumption of pornography as sexual gratification consumption is not just like it's also women. And I think this argument that many feminists also have that watching pornography leads to some kind of rape, which happened, a few years back when Josephine rape happened, is also not tenable, right? Because that's actually an anti-feminist argument, partially because then you would say that women don't actually exercise sexual gratification watching pornography, which is not true, right? The surveys will say otherwise. So I think we're going to have a much more nuanced conversation on pornography. I just want to put that in.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to rush through unfortunately, the rest of my slides, but it relates to this question about what we can do. And I think that what's really important is what kind of a consent culture can we contribute to. And if we can just move on to the slide that says consent, and others don't look at it. So okay, what do I focus on? So yeah, I think I'll just speak about one thing in the consent context, which is that consent is normally thought about in terms of consenting to the other. But I think what BDSM brings in is this aspect of consenting to the self. Like, to what extent am I able to consent to my own desires? And because I also feel that I'm not dismissing the porn question at all, but I'm saying that the porn question also comes with a lot of anxiety. And I think the anxieties have to do with the anxieties that our own desires also generate. Own meaning, I don't mean just personal, I just mean us as feminists and the kind of desires that we have. And I'm saying this because I conducted an anonymous online survey for my book with 30 respondents. Maybe like half of them were from the women's movement. It wasn't a quantitative survey, but 28 out of 30 respondents experienced intense inner conflict about their fantasies, which they felt went against mutuality, dignity, rights, and consent. So there is a lot of anxiety amongst us about our desires, and I feel that the greatest value of the lens of the unconscious is that it can help us feel less judgmental and to kind of be more okay with our desires, even if they are kind of and disturbing, but to have a deeper kind of okayness about them. Because the more I like the Hindi word sahaj, the more sahaj we are about our own desires, the better we can negotiate with others. And just quickly to say that, and I love this kind of formulation, that we have the right to say no only when we have the right to say yes. So this yes/no binary is also something that we need to challenge. And can we move on to the next? I don't actually know how to run out of time. Okay, I'll just say it very quickly. I mean, I have a slide on non-binary messiness. And I feel that that while as feminists we have challenged many binaries between the private and the public, between the personal and the political, between the whore and the goddess, yeah, even man, woman, of course, you know. So despite the challenge that we pose to all kinds of binaries, that is there a danger that in our feminist thinking that we also subscribe to binaries? In terms of empowered, disempowered, consent, yes and no, in terms of the views and the positions that we are taking on subjects, that is there a very black and white for or against kind of position taking that is happening with amongst us as feminists? Like how much space is there for messiness even in discourse, in conversations, or are we kind of driven to a need for certainty? No, this is the way that it is. And perhaps something that the messiness of BDSM can maybe invite us into maybe freeing ourselves of that need for certainty and of black and white conversations. Yeah. So if submission is powerful, if fear can also be thrilling, if pain can be pleasurable, then maybe we can be more messy in our conversations and our take on things. And the next slide, which I think is the last one. Is it okay to take 2 more minutes? Yeah, okay. So the last thing that I wanted to say in terms of what BDSM offers feminism. So one was about consent, the second was about this non-binary messiness. And the third is the unlikely routes to enjoyment. Okay, now I do want you to look at the slide. You can just put the next slide. Yeah. So see, instead of pleasure, up there I put erotic enjoyment. Because I think pleasure is a confusing word, because pleasure is normally associated with that which is pleasing and pleasant. And that's out of sync with reality, because erotic enjoyment is a much broader kind of a term. And so we can see that pain, humiliation, fear, control, whether giving up control or assuming control, and all these are routes to erotic enjoyment. And I'm not just talking about the BDSM community. I'm just talking about us. I mean, maybe not all of us, but whatever, many of us. So, so if we kind of stay with this at the level of the personal, what might it help us understand about the political? If you can just move on to the next Okay, so here, as you can see, I have put political enjoyment. Okay, that's not a term I made it up. But if you look at the roots to political enjoyment and think of this in a context in which, say, whether it's Trump in the US, whether it's Turkey, Brazil, India, Boris Johnson in the UK, whatever. Think of all of that. Think of us today, okay? And think of how little the lens of rationality can help us make sense of what's happening in terms of politics. So leaders and parties are being voted back into power who have done nothing about unemployment, who have let the COVID crisis become like unimaginably bad, and yet people are being voted back into power and we are constantly bewildered. Hashtag how can it be? So the hashtag how can it be is not just about how can it be that somebody like me has fantasies like this. It's like hashtag how can it be that he was re-elected? Yeah, that kind of thing. So if we look at the roots to political enjoyment, we can see that see what's happening in BDSM is completely consensual. So don't get me wrong, I'm not pathologizing BDSM. I'm just saying that can help us actually see that these unlikely routes to enjoyment are happening in the political realm as well. So when we hear Hindu Khatre Mein Hai, that is fear, and fear has an erotic charge. Hatred, of course, hatred of the other has an erotic charge. Violence has an erotic charge, and so does insecurity, right? So this is an invitation to actually think about politics as well from this kind of a lens of the unlikely routes to enjoyment. And not to limit ourselves to the realm of rationality, and yeah. So I think that's another way in which BDSM can help not just feminism, but actually a broader understanding of politics as well. And I'll end with that.
Thank you so much. That is really wonderful, like provocative conversation. We can open up for one or two pressing questions. We don't have the time, but we're happy to open up the space for one or two questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is wonderful. Like always lovely hearing you speak. My question is a little bit around ambiguity and power. And I think what you were saying about this non-binary messiness. And I think, years after Me Too, we kind of learned from our mistakes of doing carceral politics, of canceling and ousting and all of that. And I was wondering I'm interested to know from you how these self-reporting, self-healing mechanisms work within the community, which aren't carceral, which think about, I think, violence and, error and pain in a way which could be potentially healing and could not, doesn't operate in the framework of perpetrator and victim.
So unfortunately, I haven't thought about this enough, but I don't have a very happy kind of thing to share. I wish I did. But because what I've quite recently experienced in somebody who actually talked to me for a long time about what her experience was. I don't need to obviously go into the details of it, but it was so striking to me that actually that her relationship, she was a submissive, her relationship with the dominant was so complicated. Okay, she really wanted a much more serious emotional kind of dynamic with him, which he didn't seem to want to have. And so there was all this kind of messiness around that and unfulfilled expectations. And the kind of action that she wanted the community to take against this guy was amazing. I can't violate confidentiality, but it's mind-boggling what she wanted us to do to him. And this is somebody who actually repeatedly keeps going back to that dominant. So I don't think it's so divorced from because we are of course all coexisting in similar kind of worlds. But I think to the extent that there is a sense of safety that consent violations will mean that some action will be taken. But I think that that messiness, emotional messiness, and from that place of emotional messiness, wanting certainty of punishment, that thing is still operating. The more the less control I have emotionally, the more clear-cut punishment I want. I want certainty there because there's no certainty within.
So I want to talk about desire a bit. We have been talking about.
It's on.
I just wanted to talk about desire a bit. We have been talking about desire being influenced by this unknown social consciousness and everything. And I think when we talked about, porn being leading to violence, what struck me out was that in that stream of thought, what we are basically saying is that people are a slave to desire. They see something violent, they want to mimic it, and they cannot help themselves, so they rape. But I think what we are missing here is that if we are talking about desire in terms of power, how can that discourse be devoid without talking about autonomy? I mean, how can we reduce desire to just some subconscious thought? Because in a lot of ways, BDSM is about taking power back, right? And that has to come from a place of choice, of conscious deliberation.
So you finish? Oh, that's actually such an excellent question, because I see no conflict between the play of the unconscious and actually and acting upon one's desires. Actually, I don't see a conflict. In fact, I feel that if one is aware that so much of our desires are coming from the unconscious, and that makes us less judgmental, that means we can actually enact our fantasies. So rather than the unconscious actually stifling autonomy, a recognition of the play of the unconscious actually allows us to enact fantasies, because then we are not judging ourselves. Then we're not saying, oh, bad feminist, how can you have this kind of desire? Because then you know that actually it's actually got nothing to do with, I might have a rape fantasy and I'll go out on the streets and protest against rape. You know that if I'm kind of okay with that recognition of the play of the unconscious, then I will be able to enact my fantasies with greater autonomy and choice. Are you?
Yeah.
That's the last.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's why when it comes to sex and BDSM, it's very important to be honest with yourself before you talk to your partner. I feel like communication is very important here, because you have to tell your partner what is your expertise, how you're going to go about it, or how you want to try new things, or how you don't want to try certain things. So before you have that conversation with your partner, I feel like it's important to be honest with yourself. That way you can avoid a lot of mistakes.
Right. I totally agree about the importance of communication, but I just want to share one thing, that communication doesn't have to have, it's about when I could have a personal preference about when to communicate. Is it doesn't have to be verbal? Yeah, right. And even if it's verbal, it doesn't have to be before or during, it can even be after. I think that's another thing that BDSM kind of has taught me, that you can have a lot of conversation afterwards. And I much prefer that. You know, how was it? What worked? What didn't work? What were the triggers? Because the problem with affirmative consent as a paradigm is that it's based on a faulty notion that we know beforehand what our desires are. I mean, of course, we can talk about, yeah, these are my limits, is what I like. But actually, precisely because of the play of the unconscious, I think most of the times we ourselves don't know what our desires are. And that's such a wonderful thing as well, that we don't know what's going to what's going to transpire. So in a affirmative consent model, where the faulty assumption is that we know beforehand. And that's why we need mechanisms like the safe word, which have this kind of openness that, yeah, maybe I don't know how I'm going to feel, how the other person's going to feel, how I like or don't like a particular act, but I can go on that journey, secure in the knowledge that I have consent on my side, because I can use something like safe word.
That's why I also mentioned that you can also mention before time itself that I want to try certain things. I want you to try certain things so that I can tell you after how I felt about it.
Yeah, yeah,
It's really important to have those conversations before you figure out.
yeah. And at the risk of being wicked, can I also evoke my friend who said that, the dominant who said that he likes to make his submissive do what they don't like. So I think that's a cool one to push limits. And not also fall into that danger that, okay, now I like this, so I do this. But is the point really liking? I mean, yes. But if you're talking about power play, maybe the point is not just what I like.
Yes. I think I feel sorry,
on behalf of everyone at CJLS, I would like to thank Jaya so much for this excellent, engaging and provocative session. It has been an absolute pleasure. No pun intended there. In fact, it was intimate setting with you. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'd like to request everyone in thanking Jaya for this wonderful work. We also had a great turnout today. So we would lastly like to thank our audience here who are here and who are online. And we've had a wonderful time hosting these sessions over the last few weeks, and we are hoping to do so in the future as well. Before we conclude, we would really like to thank all our team at JTLS, particularly Mr. Vikas Chandok, Ankita, Vipul, Pratiksha, Ajit, and all the IT team who have been a great support for us in seamlessly conducting these sessions for us. Also like to acknowledge the efforts of Subhashini and Ramani and our wonderful student photographer Anjali, who has captured this series for us and through her lens and has been a great enthusiastic member of the team. Lastly, Professor C. Rajkumar for his continued support for our work at the center, and Professor Deepika Jain for her excellent guidance and mentorship at the center for all of us. On behalf of CJLS, thank you so much, Jaya, and everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Bye.